Why do you think gossip is a problem at church specifically?
Okay. I think it's a problem at church because it's a problem everywhere else too when you get a bunch of people together.
Okay.
And so, in other words, I know the standards should be held higher at church,
Okay.
but I also know that in workplace environments, there's a lot of gossip because you get a group of people that is around each other often.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of creates an environment where it's conducive, if you were, for gossip.
So do you think it's different at church?
I don't know if it's different.
Okay.
But I also think that there should be the expectation that gossip would not happen at church.
Okay.
Like that's, in other words, that expectation or that standard should be there.
So what do you define gossip happening at church to be?
The exact same thing I defined it as earlier.
Okay.
In other words, anytime I'm sharing anything with anybody without someone else's approval or with the intent of trying to make myself look better or to have some kind of, inside information, or to, belittle someone or put someone down. I think anytime I'm doing that, that's gossip, whether inside the church, outside the church, with church people, not with church people. So I think it looks the same.
Because I would think if the standard for human existence is higher at church,
sure,
then there's more to gossip about that could hurt someone.
And that's true.
Like if I was at work and was talking about what I did that weekend,
right?
Everybody else did the same type of stuff that weekend.
Sure.
But no one's supposed to do that stuff at church. So now normal stuff I thought was normal is getting passed around as if I'm the worst person ever.
And that can happen.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I agree with you. That can happen. Yeah. But to get to your question, when you ask, why is it a problem?
Okay.
Because in other words, not just does it exist, but actually what makes it problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And so
at church
specifically. And I think what makes it problematic at church is that, again, there should be this higher standard of like, we're not going to gossip. But unfortunately, that standard's not held very high. I mean, how many times do you know that gossip is going on in churches? It's quite often, and people will even guise it under like the idea of prayer request.
Really?
Oh yeah. Hey, you need to be in prayer for this person.
Oh.
They're going through X, Y, and Z. And you're not sharing that really for someone to pray for that person. You're sharing because you just want to tell somebody about it.
Right.
And that happens. And so I think we're just not holding people to a high enough standard at church. And that's what makes it problematic at church, is that it shouldn't be going on.
Or they just don't say what it is so that you have to go ask somebody else. Like, hey, you should really pray for Susie because...
Well, I can't say anything more.
Yeah, there you go.
She needs our prayers. Yeah. And so I think that's what makes it problematic, is that it shouldn't be happening.
I think Diane knows what's up. Go ask her.
Right. It's not for me to say.
It's not for me to say.
But
right. Go ask her mother.
Right. And then of course my cultural context being someone who grew up in the South. I mean, and especially in smaller southern towns, gossip's just blazing away anyway,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, everybody knows everything about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so gossip's just happening. And that has become such a normal part of the culture that it's there in the church as well. And it's like no one sees a problem with that because it becomes so ingrained to be a normal.
Right.
And I think that's part of where the church has to say, but no, it's not okay for it to be normal. It's not okay for this to be accepted. But I think that's where the problem lies, is don't often say that enough.
I think gossip just happens all the time. Like, how do you, like
everywhere you mean? Or, yeah.
Like, how do you even have a conversation about somebody else without gossip?
But shouldn't that be the thing? Like, we shouldn't? I mean, why do we feel the need to always share a negative thing about somebody else?
I don't know.
But we do feel like that need, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we feel like, oh, well, that's going to make me feel better somehow if I tell you about this person. Or, hey, do you know what they did? Or, hey, do you know what they did, how many ever years ago? And I think we're really bad about that too, about, saying, oh, do you know that this person, did this 20 years ago? Well, that was 20 years ago. Are they even the same person now? And so I think that is part of the problem too. Is like, it is become so norm in our culture, in every instance. And then in church, it's like, oh yeah, we know there's gossip going on. And
If I was at church,
okay,
and there was something going on about me around church,
okay,
I wouldn't care.
all right,
Like, really, I don't care what it is.
okay,
If it's a fact
right,
and it's a thing I did, then fine, whatever.
okay,
Like, if I'm going to talk about somebody else and it's
Mhm.
not a gossip thing,
right,
what is is it like specific for each person on what they care goes around?
okay.
Does
I
that
see
make
what
sense?
Sure.
Like, because if two people did the exact same thing
Right,
and I said, hey, both of them did that thing, one of them could care that people know and the other one could not care.
right.
So does that go to intent of me sharing it with somebody?
Yeah, because, well, especially if they've told you, right? In other words, if the person is like, hey, I don't care who knows,
Right.
okay, then you have permission to tell. You have permission to say. If someone else is saying, I really don't want people to know, but I'm telling you this in confidence, that's to me where the line is drawn.
But do people have that conversation at church? Like, hey, I don't want you to tell anybody?
That's a good question. Because for me as a pastor, like, I have conversations with people, and when people tell me things, I'm supposed to keep that in confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people are telling me things and I'm supposed to keep that in confidence, then I just assume, like, I almost assume when people are telling me things, I'm just kind of working under the assumption, don't tell others. And so for me, it's probably a little bit different.
Okay.
Because of just my role, the nature of my role. And a lot of times people will tell me, they'll be very explicit. Hey, pastor, ... please don't tell anyone else. And most times people are really explicit with me about that. And there's other times where conversations are had in open spaces where anyone could have overheard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you understand there, it's maybe not quite such a big deal if other people know. So I do think there's a sense of discernment about it too.
Okay.
Because I do think there's a sense of, when did they tell me? Where did they tell me? Why did they tell me? But then I also think anytime we're pointing out someone else's failures or faults to somebody else, like, I don't know how that's benefiting that other person.
Okay.
Like, and to be clear, it's one thing to have disagreements with people, right? Because I can disagree with someone. That doesn't mean I'm personally attacking you or gossiping about you. So, in other words, I can have a disagreement with someone and say, hey, I disagree with them about X, Y, and Z. But it doesn't mean I'm putting them down. It just means I see it differently.
Right.
I have a different perspective of it. And I think that's kind of where some things have kind of gotten lost too in our current culture. Because I feel like today, man, anything is gossip almost.
Right.
Like, because everybody gets offended about everything. And if somehow if someone finds out that I've disagreed with them, say I disagree with somebody and I tell someone, hey, I had a disagreement with them. And then that comes out as quote unquote gossip when that was not the intent. It was not the gossip. It was just, hey, I just disagreed. But unfortunately, everybody takes everything so personally.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I do think kind of as a general rule, rule of thumb going, okay, does this make this person, like, am I pointing out faults? Am I pointing out failures? And what is my motivation for doing so? So I think that's going back to your heart. You're checking your heart. why do I feel like I gotta say this about
Mhm.
somebody to somebody else?
What if I'm saying good things about the person, but I think it's going to make them look bad? Like,
give me an example.
Like Joseph prays 5 times a day and doesn't hang out with his family while he's praying. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what if I think that's bad and
Right.
I go tell somebody, but actually it's a good thing?
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought, because there can be those moments where you think, man, can you believe they did this? And they're like, wow, they did that?
Yeah.
That's good for them.
That's incredible.
Right. Good for them.
Right.
Or can you believe they said so-and-so to so-and-so?
Mhm.
Good for them for standing up for themselves.
Right.
And so I do think you can have that interaction where you think you're saying something negative. But again, it goes back to you, right?
Okay.
Why were you saying something that you thought was a negative?
So in the end, you're saying if I need to be aware of what's being said to me, who said it, and the context of why they said it,
Mm-hmm.
and whether it's okay to ever mention it to anybody based on that.
Yeah, and whether it's like, and why would I be mentioning it?
Right.
Yeah, because we have plenty of conversations where I can talk about, hey, Nate is incredible at X, Y, or Z, and hey, I appreciate his friendship when he helped me, when I was moving from one house to another, and right, you can talk about people, quote unquote, without it being gossip, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm just sharing information, or I'm sharing that I'm thankful or I'm grateful for someone or what they did or what they said. And that way I know my intent is not to tear someone down. My intent is not to point out their faults or their failures. My intent is to actually I want people to know how appreciative I am of them, or I actually want to make them look good in front of other people, I think there's a point where you don't want just flattery that really has no substance to it, empty flattery. But when someone does something
where you're winking to all the bad stuff,
right, exactly.
You're such a great person.
Yeah. And you're the most horrible person ever. Right.
Go ask Diane.
She knows all. But yeah, so I do think there's that. We don't want to just give empty words of flattery, but we do want to be able to speak well of others and to speak, I'm thankful for others. That's why we have to look at, what is my intent of it and what is the information I'm sharing about the person.